Free agency frenzy's slowing down a little bit. We're moving on to the NFL draft here on the Sprint Right Option podcast. We got a friend join us, Brian Peacock. Hang out, talk 49ers draft with us now.
Welcome, everybody.
We are live.
My name is Jason Aponte.
I am Andrew Pasquini.
We're working. That's it. We're working over here. That's it. Let's go Niners.
Let's go Niners. Sprint Right Option podcast. Oh my goodness, we are live. It's a new episode of the Sprint Right Option podcast. I am Andrew Pasquini, joined as always by Jason Aponte. A little bit of a scheduling conflict earlier. That's okay. We got Brian Peacock of the Locked On 49ers podcast. Eric Crocker couldn't join us. That's okay. He is one of the busiest men on 49ers Twitter. Brian Peacock, we got you though. How are you doing on this lovely Friday afternoon?
You don't want Croc's takes anyway, man. So my back hurts from carrying him every day on the Lockdown 49ers. So, by the way, there's a bracket out there, and I'm going up against Croc in it. So, guys, make sure you vote on the guy who showed up to Sprint Right Option. Okay, that's all I'm saying. Croc's got a big head. He won the bracket last year. I think we need to take him down a peg. So, no, but I appreciate the invite, guys. I'm pumped. I've got draft fever right now. We're doing mock drafts. Those folks out there that are doing that make those mock draft simulators doing the Lord's work, because I'm seeing them left and right now on the timeline, and it's a lot of fun. I love draft season. It's a heck of a lot more fun, right, guys, when the Niners have first and second round draft picks?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's the part that is so fun, right? Like, so these last few years, we've been having to dig for like guys in the 100s, and everyone's like looking at all these guys, and we're like, man, he'd be really good. Oh, wait, the team doesn't have any sort of pick. So yeah, it's way more fun to actually look at first round talent, and now we can speculate on that. And we have another thing to argue about altogether as 49ers Twitter about your favorite prospect, my favorite prospect. The arguments never end when it comes to all this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I remember last year we do our ultimate mock draft on Locked On Network that I also host, and it's a whole lot of fun. And not having a first round pick, you have to just kind of project who might be there at your team's first pick. And for the 49ers, Croc and I were watching tape, and we're like, man, this Sam Laporta guy is awesome. He might be a third. We're seeing him third round mocks. Okay, so let's throw his name in there. And he didn't even get within 50 picks of where the 49ers were. So yeah, a lot more fun this year. You actually get to draft one of those guys potentially that you fall in love with their tape.
That's the exact name I was going to mention, was Sam Laporta, because that was my draft crush. It's like, well, he might not make it to the third round, but I've seen some mocks, and it just was never even a thought. And so that's my favorite thing about the first round pick with the Niners is you look at all these names, and especially with a need for the 49ers offensive line, you see like some mocks having 12 names go, and it's like, oh, you're still getting quality at 31. That definitely hasn't been the case the past couple of years, where it's like, yeah, I mean, this guy is the 60th best player in the draft, but is he going to get to 99? And it's a lot more difficult. So it's more fun this year. It's definitely more fun to talk about these prospects. And I actually wanted to start with the first round pick, actually, Brian. I listened to your podcast this morning, Locked On 49ers. Go listen to it. I'm not going to go into too specifics because I want the people to go listen to it, listen to the mock draft, all the thoughts. But you did make a trade up. There was a name that we'll say you made the Brandon Ayuk trade. We won't tease that. But you guys moved up. I won't say the team, won't say the name unless you want to talk about it. Moved up to get an offensive lineman. And I think that's my thought. And I think it's Jason. I think it's a lot of people, is the Niners are using a first round pick on an offensive lineman. Do you think it's the first pick no matter where they go? Or do you think they're fine just staying at 31, maybe move Ayuk and take a different position? Or do you think they move up specifically to get an offensive lineman?
Yeah, with that podcast, it was the Ayuk scenario. I just wanted to see what it looked like if the 49ers were to find a team that made them an offer that made sense, and just play that through and say, okay, if the 49ers traded Brandon Ayuk to a team that has a first round pick, how would that change things for the 49ers? Does it make them a better team overall? Obviously, it helps the salary cap situation for the 49ers if they were to do that, but can you replace Ayuk? Does it help you to get a better offensive lineman that you might get at 31? Because the thing at 31 that I'm learning is I think there's going to be a good player there for the 49ers, but you don't really get – everybody else in the league gets to choose which player you take. And you're going to be left over with the last guy on your list potentially, instead of maybe getting the guy that checks all the boxes. And maybe you don't get an offensive tackle. You have to settle for a really good interior offensive lineman. Maybe the right offensive lineman isn't there at all. And so the best player available is a corner, or maybe the best player available is a defensive lineman, which the 49ers have already done a lot of work on. So I could see them going up a little bit. Obviously, a Brandon Ayuk trade, the 49ers would have to get considerable return for it to make sense for them. I think that's still possible. Might be a draft day trade. I would guess that it's not happening. It's not us trying to ship Brandon Ayuk out. I think the way to play it is re-up Brandon Ayuk, trade Deebo Samuel next offseason. I still believe that's the way to go. And the second round's a great spot this year and many years to draft a wide receiver. So that's the plan I would go with, is look for a wide receiver on day 2 who could be ready potentially to step into a bigger role in 2025 and roll long-term with Brandon Ayuk, who's a couple of years younger, will probably age better. I mean, I would definitely put money that Brandon Ayuk's a better NFL wide receiver in 2026 than Deebo Samuel is. So that should probably be the plan for the 49ers going forward. But they love themselves some Deebo, and if a team gives them the value this year, and they listened to trades on Deebo a couple years ago, it makes it basically, I feel like it's really similar right now with Brandon Ayuk and the DeForest Buckner offseason, right? Coming off a Super Bowl loss, and John Lynch calls the bluff of the or the agent calls the bluff of John Lynch, maybe in the DeForest Buckner case. And John Lynch says, look, if you got a better offer, you don't want to sign here, you better bring back a first-round pick. And so maybe that's the scenario. And if the right team comes, we've heard Jaguars, we've heard Steelers, I think that's the right value that you should ask in return for Brandon Ayuk if you're the 49ers, and still maybe say no to it. Will a team pony up those first-round picks with how good the receiver class is? We'll see. But at 31, if you don't move up, I think there should be a good player for the 49ers. You might be just on the outside looking in on some of the players you really, really want, maybe a minor trade up, or you just take the best player there, and then that impacts the way you attack the rest of the draft.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thought process of me asking that question to John Lynch at the Combine about best player available and fitting a need. But when you look at the way that the 49ers have brought back Feliciano and brought back Colton McKivitz, it gives 49er fans the impression that they're just running it back. My thought process on it is like kind of what Brian was saying about, yeah, you can target a guy all you want. You can target him all you want in the draft. But if somebody takes him, you still have to insulate yourself. And they're saying, hey, worst case scenario is we can run this offensive line that got us to the Super Bowl back. That's not what they're thinking. That's not what they want to do. It's probably not ideal, but you still have to insulate yourself. So when everyone is foaming at the mouth like, oh, offensive line, it's who's going to be there. And I think when you look at the way the free agency has actually played itself out, you're seeing the 49ers kind of filling holes a little bit and just putting themselves in a position where they're absolutely flexible in the draft, whether it's a trade up, whether it's, finding a best player available or going for a need. That's what makes it so interesting right now, because the team didn't have many holes. And I think the Isaac Yidium signing is a little bit flying under the radar in terms of what they're going to be able to do, because he could be potentially, I think they're betting on last season for him being the exception to what he's been. The rule to what he's been, not the exception. Like, I think they think they found something, and then they can do whatever they want in the draft. So I don't want people to panic when you see Colton McKivitz sign again and Feliciano back and everyone say, well, they're just running it back. I don't know if it's that. I think they're really just trying to put themselves in a position where if that is the scenario, if that is how it plays out, they still have at least a line that made the Super Bowl, right? And I don't think that stops them from going offensive line or anything like that, much to the contrary of the discussion.
They've really attacked their needs to, and I think this is the right way for most teams to play it in free agency. Free agency is for needs, draft is for drafting the best players, and is for the future. And if you get guys that hit early and can play early, then good. But we've seen Kyle Shanahan's offense. It's pretty rare for a guy to come in. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if they did draft an offensive tackle and he doesn't play much year one, or a wide receiver. If they draft one high, doesn't play a lot in year one. So you're really drafting for years 2, 3, and beyond with players, and you're using free agency for the immediate needs. And I think the best way to go about it if you're a football team is on draft day, before you're on the clock, you could go out and play a football game. And I think the 49ers are right there right now, which gives them options in the draft, which way they go, and they can play the draft board rather than being forced into taking a kicker way too high or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, and
obviously, but just,
but why? But why? But why? You know what you're doing when you say that, Brian. You know what you're doing.
I think everybody knows what they're doing at this point.
It's a bit at this point. It's a bit. There he is.
It's a bit. There's Crocker.
It's in this podcast.
We love it.
Croc, JKBG said you can't be here because you're out campaigning for the next round. And is there beef in the Locked On family? Like, is there static?
Look, I'm not going to say this is a Jordan Pippen situation right now, but I just will say that Croc's getting a big head about his bracket win last year. He thinks this is just going to be a cakewalk in round 2, and I don't think it is.
I was going to tease this was the most anticipated round 2 matchup of that tournament, but since you're here, I think SRO fully endorses Brian Peacock for this tournament. And I think maybe just to get in, Crocker's head a little bit with this tournament, you should start deleting social media posts, anything that references Locked On 49ers, kind of let the people know. Yeah, gotta start teasing that. Especially with he seems very into this tournament, and I like it because I think it's a fun tournament.
It's fun,
very polarizing, but I think it's very fun. It's fun. I as a salty person, I've drawn very poor first round matchups the last 2 years. I had Jordan Elliott last year and Rob Lauder this year, so I was very early exits, but very fun to see you guys. See how far you guys go.
Podcast to fight.
Honestly, I do want to say this, and this is the first time I've been on with you guys on this pod. I think I haven't been on this pod before. I've been on with Conte, but not on the Sprint Right Option podcast. Right. And the 49ers, media and podcasting creator community, whatever you want to call it, is strong. I think it's the most well-covered team in the entire NFL. The fans are great. The fans are global. And I love the folks that do all this stuff. And I have no ill will towards anybody, even when it comes to bracket fights and all that stuff. I appreciate all the content creators out there, and I like to prop folks up, and I like to have good conversations with everybody, man. And there's some catty business that happens out there. I don't get involved with that stuff.
That's what I was gonna say. That's not that's very PC of you, because that's not how this works. Like, everyone is literally trying to tear each other's throats out. But again, you are the example. You are the thing to aspire to, Brian, as usual here, man. I wanted to ask you real quick, because it is about 12 minutes in. Again, guys, you know who Brian Peacock is. Make sure you guys are locked into Locked On 49ers. Like and subscribe this video, and subscribe to the Sprint Right Option wherever you get your audio podcast. I want to talk Nepo babies. I just want to get right into it. And we Andrew's got names, and we'll get back to like actual draft prospects. I have a take that I feel is not being taken well about one of the babies of the great 49er players, and that just happens to be Brendan Rice. Mm-hmm. And whatever, I'm just gonna say it. I am not as big on on him as everyone else is. I mean, look, when I watch his film, he doesn't have the route running acumen. At times, he's running wide open and the ball's being thrown to him. He relies too much on his upper body to gain. He can't gain separation. He's slow in and out of breaks. I just have an issue with why is it because of his name that we're talking about him this highly, when I don't really think that other people are viewing him that same exact way? If his name was Brendan Stevenson, I don't think anybody would care at all. Brian, what do you think? Am I tripping?
No, I don't think you're tripping. Part of it is just name recognition. It's not even that you think he's going to be the next Rice. It's just that there's 300 draft prospects. And if you're, more of a casual draft fan and you're not putting on tape and doing that thing, then 20 names. And after the first round's over, 3 names. And those names are Rice, McCaffrey, and Gore. So I don't think it's the fault of the players. I just think I think a good example is when the 49ers needed a defensive coordinator. I got a lot of folks to say they should hire Richard Sherman. It's like, well, why would you think Richard Sherman should be defensive coordinator? Because you know his name? He's never coached a down in his life, right? So, and he's a smart guy, and he could be a good defensive coach, but you don't just walk in and become defensive coordinator when you never called plays anywhere. I think part of it is just name recognition, and it's a natural, it's just human nature, I think. And I like Brandon Rice. If he was there in the right spot, then you draft him, but I'm not taking him in the second round or anything like that. And the same goes for Luke McCaffrey and Frank Gore Jr. I think they're good prospects, and I would endorse all of them in the right spot, but I'm not fighting over, I'm not tripping over myself to try to go draft those guys super early.
Yeah, so I was thinking, because you mentioned the name value, and I think the big reason we're seeing those names a lot is the name value. So I was trying to come up with a start, cut, bench type game for the draft. Best I could come up with here is trade up, stay put, or trade down 4. And it doesn't matter what round, just hypothetical round. Mm-hmm. Trade up 4, stay put, trade back, Luke McCaffrey, Brendan Rice, and Frank Gore Jr.
I like that. So it would definitely...
Best I could come up with.
No, that's great. It would be a trade back for Brandon Rice.
Okay.
It'd be a stay put, like in the 7th round for Frank Gore Jr. And
Okay.
it would be a trade up for Luke McCaffrey,
Okay.
but that would also be day 3. It would be like,
Okay.
6th round, he's still there. You go get him. You let him compete as a special teamer and see if you can develop a wide receiver from him. But one of the underrated things the 49ers haven't addressed yet going into the draft is that punt returner, kick returner position. And if the new rules pass, kick returner is going to be more valuable than it has been the last few years. And we've seen the muff punt in the Super Bowl. That wasn't Ray McLeod's fault, but it's a position where you have to have a guy that can field a punt. And Ray McLeod was your main and really only kick returner and punt returner last year. You don't want Deebo Samuel returning a lot of kickoffs. So that's a position that unless the 49ers address it before the draft, they're going to have to find somebody there. And I could see Luke McCaffrey fitting into that kind of a role.
Wow. And I was going to give the spicy take that I think that Luke McCaffrey is a better route runner than Brendan Rice. But now you're kind of making me walk it back now. Why does he have to be taken so late now at this point? I see Brendan Rice taken in the 3rd and 4th rounds. And I'm just like, that's too early. It just feels like it's too early for me.
Yeah, day 3, I think for all those guys, for me.
Perfect. Going from day 3 now, just hard adjustments and back to day 1. It's something I really liked in the Locked On podcast this morning. You mentioned that mock drafts are scenarios. And I think a lot of people nowadays look at mock drafts. And I know there's a few people out there that are connected and their mock drafts are more, this is what I'm hearing is happening. But I feel like a lot of mock drafts should be treated as such, as different scenarios. I really like that you touched on that. So this is in the spirit. I saw a tweet, and I forget who it was from, that connected Brock Bowers to Kansas City, because nobody seems to really know where Brock Bowers is going. And it was just hypothetical of if he falls to 32, Kansas City would be a great place. So in the spirit of that, 31, is there a player, and I'm not going to say because obviously Joe Alt would not fall back to 31, right, obviously. So let's try and keep it realistic, because I feel like once you get past that top 5 to 10 area, that's where the draft gets really funky. And I mean, 5 to 10, obviously a little weird too, outside of the top 3 quarterbacks. But is there a name in that mid area in the first round that regardless of position, if he's at 31, the Niners need to change whatever plan they have and go get that guy?
I totally agree with you, by the way. 10 to 30 could be really different. And for me, the guy that makes the most sense is the perfect fit for the 49ers, where they're at, how fun his tape was to watch. And it's rare that an offensive lineman has the most fun tape to put on. Usually you're watching running backs and wide receivers and having all kinds of fun. Talise Fuaga, he's the perfect fit. He can start day 1 at right tackle. Maybe he's a future left tackle. He wrecks things in the running game. He's a good pass protector. There's upside there, but there's immediate starting potential for him. So Talise Fuaga is a player that he's not a left tackle, so some teams might go a different direction with a different player in the draft in that 10 to 20 range. If he gets into the 20s, Talise Fuaga is my guy. Probably doesn't get to 31, but man, the draft is always insane. And we get into this group think, and you'll put out a mock draft and you'll see people say, no way would that ever happen. And you're like, have you ever watched the draft? The draft is more insane than any mock draft you will see leading up to the actual draft. So there's a chance that some teams say, his arms are a little short. Maybe he's a guard. He's a right tackle only. We want a guy who's going to be a left tackle. So he starts to slip through some teams. Talise Fuaga gets into the 20s. I think that's my guy for the 49ers. He's so fun to watch. Kyle Shanahan loves himself a run blocker, but he can pass protect too. He's a much better pass protector than, say, Mike McGlinchey was. I've seen him as high as, pick 10 in the draft. I don't think he's going to go that high. He could. If he starts creeping into the 20s, Talise Fuaga is my guy.
You know what's funny about the whole offensive line situation? I know we have to keep harping on it because it's such a big topic, and I think we all agree that the 49ers need to address it, because the perception of the investments that the 49ers have made, it's not that they haven't invested, they just haven't invested high-end guys. Like even Aaron Banks being a second rounder, that even felt a little rich, right? But going back to Colton McKivitz, I think they kind of missed the Daniel Brunskill guy who's like the relief pitcher who can play guard, who can play left tackle, right tackle. And I think there is still a scenario where the 49ers draft an offensive lineman. They have Colton McKivitz in their back pocket. But if you get to camp and that guy starts kicking everybody's ass and he ends up starting, I think that's best case scenario because now you have depth. And you know what? Regardless of what you think about Colton McKivitz, it's still valuable depth because you know that he's been able to hold up at least for how many games in a regular season. I think that's what makes this whole offensive line situation so interesting is I do think that they want Colton McKivitz to kind of slide into that Brunskill role of like, hey, in a pinch, somebody's injured, get out there. I mean, you literally in the biggest game of the year against the Rams, Trent Williams can't go. Boom, put him out there at left tackle. He was fine. He can play right tackle. He's a guard. Like I do think that they still value that. So I don't want anyone to overreact to the way that they've been stockpiling this offensive line because there are different scenarios, and one of them is drafting a guy. And if he gets to camp, even if they don't believe he could play before camp, if he starts kicking ass, he's going to start. So again, it just boils down to having yourself flexible to all of these options and not putting yourself in a position where we're like, well, we're not going to bring Feliciano back. We're not going to re-sign McKivitz. We're just going to go in the draft and get it. And then when all those guys are gone, you're stuck looking around for like these plug and play options. And you're literally like putting your finger in a bunch of like water dripping out holes, like trying to just get this together. And it feels really like, don't laugh, Andrew. It really just feels like the 49ers are keeping themselves flexible. That's all. That's
Good
all.
analogy.
No doubt. Yeah, they could draft a center, a guard, a tackle. Colton McKivitz could be, and Colton McKivitz isn't making too much money to be a swing tackle. He could start at guard potentially. He could start at probably 4 out of 5 positions on the offensive line. Who knows? Maybe they have him snapping in camp if they draft a first-round offensive tackle. So, you got to be flexible. And when you only suit up 7 offensive linemen on Sundays, the 2 backups have to be able to play multiple positions. You have to have a guy who can play guard center and a guy who can play guard tackle. And so that's really important. And the 49ers have that flexibility. They could go anywhere in the draft on the offensive line. They could do it early, day 2. They could do day 3. And I think they'll probably take a couple of guys and create a lot of competition there.
Love it.
Going from offensive line now to a position that you've mentioned a little bit. I know you have a draft favorite, A.D. Mitchell, wide receiver, because there's so much intrigue there, not just with even removing the Brandon Ayuk situation, but this question kind of depends on what they do with Brandon Ayuk. So maybe a little bit of a scenario here. I think there's 2 kind of thoughts of receivers that 49er fans would like the Niners to go after. There's the speedy guys, Xavier Worthy, Ricky Pearsall, A.D. Mitchell, but there's also those, I don't want to say Debo type guys, because I feel like calling them Debo type guys is already putting too high of a pedestal on them. Yeah. But there's Xavier Leggett, there's Malachi Corley. Is there a Brian Peacock preference on what type of receiver they should go out, and how much does that change if Ayuk's on the roster week 1 versus Ayuk not being on the roster?
Yeah, there's we'll know if Ayuk's on the roster before pick 31, right? So I think that changes the type of player you're looking for, like an X versus a Z type of wide receiver. A.D. Mitchell's, I wouldn't say he's my favorite guy. He's a boomer bust. He scares the crap out of me, but he also shows some things that you're like, man, he could be an absolute dude. His ceiling's higher than Brandon Ayuk's, and I think he would fit that position. So that's why, he's someone we looked at once we did the Brandon Ayuk trade away scenario, and might take some time. He's not necessarily a yak bro, but as that outside X receiver that could win at multiple levels, good ball skills, could be a good red zone player. I could see him fitting with Brock Purdy in the 49ers offense, and very different player than Debo on the other side. But if it's the scenario that we talked about with the 49ers re-signing or extending Brandon Ayuk, and then maybe moving off of Debo Samuel before 2025, then Malachi Corley is definitely my guy. And I think he should be there right around that pick 63, that second round range. I like Leggett too. He's also kind of a boomer bust guy along with A.D. Mitchell. But Malachi Corley is, you don't want to say he's a clone, and I agree. You don't want to put that on him because Debo Samuel's so unique. But if you were trying to find someone that you could develop for a year and slip into a similar type of role that could play some wide back stuff for you, and then make Brandon Ayuk a featured part of your offense, the true number 1 guy, and you don't need someone to play a Debo Samuel role, but someone who could do some of those things, play inside, play outside, take some handoffs. Malachi Corley's the guy, and I like the physicality there, and he's built similarly, and I think he's a good fit in the second round for the 49ers in the non-Ayuk trade scenario.
Yeah.
I think what this brings up is one of my favorite things about who you prefer in the draft as opposed to the best prospect. And what I mean by that is fit. And when you look back at that draft class of Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, Brandon Ayuk, at that time, and I'm just going to put myself back out there and I continue to do it, who I wanted the 49ers to draft was Henry Ruggs. And it wasn't because I thought Henry Ruggs was the best receiver on the board. I didn't think that. I thought they needed a vertical guy, a guy who can take screens to the house, a little bit more that could obviously develop. When you start to put in your mock drafts and you're putting for other players, especially when, obviously we specialize in the 49ers, it's less about best prospect and more about fit. And I think that's the most interesting part of the draft process and evaluation for us, right? Because we're on the outside looking in. I don't know what goes on, in those boardrooms and what the board looks like. But that's what makes these things interesting. It's like, well, why didn't you draft Justin Jefferson? Well, many people thought Justin Jefferson was just going to be a slot receiver. Like, literally, remember, all he's going to be able to do is a slot. And then, look, he turns into that, right? Brandon Ayuk goes in the second round. For the hardcore draft guys, they knew who he was. But when I was looking at Henry Ruggs, I'm looking at a guy who can take the top of a defense. I thought it was going to open things up for everybody else. Would have helped Jimmy Garoppolo at the time. I think that's the most interesting part about this whole draft process is fit, need, and also prospect. But sometimes the fit is better than the prospect, if that makes any sense.
And where you take a guy too. So if you have to take, like I was talking about AD Mitchell, he's a boomer bust guy, kind of scares me, but he could be, a stud, true wide receiver 1 in the NFL. But if you have to take him as the 4th wide receiver in this draft and you have to take him at pick 12, I'd rather take Xavier Legette in the 2nd round and have a similar boomer bust type player. And so that's kind of the thing for me. And where the 49ers sit at 31, they might need to move around to have that need meet value and have it match up. Because if not, I see a lot of names in the chat, like Chop Robinson. I like Chop Robinson. And he might be the best player available at 31. But if you want an offensive lineman, maybe you got to move up or you got to move back to make that need meet value. And
I don't know if he makes it to 31, in my opinion, just in my opinion.
I don't know if he does either, but one of the top 31 has to make it there. And almost, in every prospect, you're like, he could be there, but he might not be there. Someone's got to make it, make a list of 31. One of those guys got to be there. And that's what I'm saying with the 49ers at pick 31 is they might not get to choose, right? The league's going to choose for them. And so it might not be if Chop Robinson gets there, that means probably the corners and the offensive lineman went first. If Kool-Aid McKinstry's there, it might mean that all the defensive linemen and all the offensive linemen went early and the corner fell to you. And so that's the 49ers probably. And the 49ers really, just based on what we've seen them do in free agency at the end, set themselves up knowing that. And I kind of like the idea of moving up in round 2 or 3, trying to get in the top 50, trying to get in the top 75 to secure your guy at one of those positions to fill that need after you're informed by how the board falls in the first 31 picks. So if I was going into the draft today, I would probably sit pretty tight at pick 31, try to utilize one of those extra 4th round picks, move up a couple spots from 31 if the right guy's there, or more likely try to move up in round 2 or 3 with one of those 4th round picks to try to target one of your guys at one of your more needy positions.
The other thing too is I think it's so easy to just say, oh, they need this, they need that, but the board is going to play itself out in that way. And I think that's what's so good about what you're saying, because you could see a scenario where Kool-Aid falls to 31. And it's at that point, it's man, I don't know how you can pass on a guy that, even though there was concerns about, at the combine, obviously the injury, they were talking about his effort. It's hard for me to look at this team right now with the way that they're built and not go best player available, whatever that is, right? And I don't know what the board is. I don't know what it looks like, what they're valuing. But, man, it would be really cool to get, one of those, stud guys, because it feels like a lot of people are sliding on Kool-Aid because of the injury and because of those concerns. And then off of name value alone, just name value alone. How cool is it to get a guy named Kool-Aid?
Right. And if he didn't have those concerns, he wouldn't make it to 31.
Right.
And, Amarius Mims. Amarius Mims is a crazy one, because if I was his agent, I'd be like, what are you doing, man? Go take some NIL money and then go be a top 5 pick next year. You're a freak of nature. Go put a full season together. But if it wasn't for only 8 starts in his college career, then there's no way he was close to the 49ers at pick 31. And so he's the ultimate boomer bust player in this entire draft. And you throw some injury questions on top of it and even gets hurt at the combine, pulls a hammy, but he's running 5.04 at 6'7", 340 pounds. Crazy. And he can eliminate people and collapse a line in college football. When you watch his tape, there's not a lot of tape to watch. He's pretty far along in his development for being a guy who's played so little, but you're taking a big risk there. And so, it's fascinating. And you're not going to get the most clean first round prospect at pick 31. In a lot of years, you're not going to get a first round prospect at all at pick 31.
And I think that's kind of I don't know if it's beautiful because like it's kind of a need, but it's the beautiful thing of how the Niners handled this offseason free agency period is they've really set themselves up with a lot of guys where it's okay, maybe the offensive tackle that we wanted at 31 isn't there. Well, we got this need at corner, or we got and I really like this. I do want to interrupt real quick because Mayoko threw a tweet out there while you guys were talking, touching on something that we talked about. Missouri State wide receiver Tariq Owens, son of Hall of Famer Terrell Owens, worked out in front of more than 20 scouts today at the University of Missouri, including the 49ers. So we have Jerry Rice, Frank Gore,
another Nepo baby.
Yeah.
and McCaffrey, and now Terrell Owens. We're just throwing another one in there. So do we need to add? Oh no, obviously.
At this point, just draft Willis Patrick just because of the name. Like at this point, he's not even a son. Like it's just like if we're gonna evaluate these guys just based on former 49ers legends, then let's just go balls to the wall. McCaffrey, Gore, Rice, Owens, Willis Patrick, do it all for the vibes. Vibes are much more important in the evaluation process than actual tape and technique and things like that, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And it's funny because the coaches and the GMs and they didn't grow up being 49ers fans, right? So they don't care that much. Now, Frank Gore's in the building. So that would be a pretty cool moment we saw that with the Cowboys last year when one of the scouts called his son, is like, hey, you're going to be a Dallas Cowboy, right?
What is it? You want to come to work with your dad? I was like, oh, exactly. Man. I was just like, oh, I want to call my dad.
And Frank Gore Jr., we're talking about a late round pick. He looks and sounds so much like his dad too. Like that would be a heartwarming one. That would be pretty cool. Yeah. Jerry Rice had I don't know how many kids Jerry Rice has, but it feels like every 5 years there's another Rice kid that comes through, right?
Hardest working guy on the field and off.
I had that. Yeah, I had that. I feel like this isn't the first Rice that's come through. Yeah, now that you say that, definitely.
Well, he was old enough to have kids in the league when he was still in the league. 20 years ago.
You know what? You know what's hilarious is like you look at the process, and obviously I got a chance to listen to Frank Gore Jr. speak, and he's very mature, at the mic and everything. But man, Jerry Rice was ripping his son apart at the combine. Like, you got to get your feet in, man. I'm just like, hey, if he's critical, then we've got to reevaluate this whole thing because he knows a little bit about ball. Wouldn't you say?
Hey, I don't want to crush Brandon Rice either. I think he's a pretty good prospect. There's a couple routes I saw him break off a little slant and kind of had some high knees, and I was like, you know what? I do see some Jerry there. He's bigger and stronger than Jerry and not as dynamic as a runner, but there's some physicality to his game that I like. And when you look at a prospect like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who came out of the same college at USC and kind of had the similar scouting report and some similar knocks in his game that Brandon Rice does, I would be all about it if you get him at the right spot. I'm just not trying to draft him in the second round, but if he's there for the 49ers in round 4, that would be phenomenal to draft someone like Brandon Rice. And I think he could be a nice fit for the 49ers.
See, look, we're saying nice things about him. Just don't listen to me, man. Who cares?
He's just, I get your overall point though from earlier is their name recognition is moving them a little too high, getting a little too much hype in the 49ers fan community. I would tell those fans to go out there and watch some tape of these other guys. A lot of good football players in this draft.
100%.
And I want to mention one of the positions with a lot of those good football players, edge rusher, pass rusher. This is always a position I'm just so interested in that the 49ers handle at the draft because it seems every year there's somewhere, someplace. And I know we've already talked about Chop Robinson. I know there's a few. Darius Robinson's another name. But I don't think edge is necessarily a priority 1 for the Niners at this point. So is there any day 2 pass rushers that you have off the top of your head that you're kind of excited for? Or is it if they don't get one of the names in the first round, it's pick or choose?
I would say Neeland, the small school guy, who, his workouts were phenomenal. If you're going to be a smaller school guy, you better dominate your competition and you better have NFL level, ability. And so I think Marshawn Neeland out of Western Michigan, I don't know why the directional schools, I'm having some favorites there. If the Niners pulled out, day 2 of Western Kentucky and Western Michigan, I guess I'd be pretty excited. But Marshawn Neeland, 6'3", 267, ran 4.75. He's got long arms. He's an interesting player. And the thing the 49ers really love is those 3 cones. And he had a phenomenal 3 cone, 7.02 and a 4.18 shuttle time, which, if I'm not mistaken, not that many guys are running the the agilities at the combine, but those were top numbers of all the defensive linemen. And he's 275 pounds at the combine. So he's an interesting player to me. I have no clue where someone like that is going to go, though. I do like the Robinsons. I like Chop more. Chop's got that get off that I think Chris Kosturek would really like. And I could absolutely see him being the pick for the 49ers at 31. Does have some D Ford vibes, and the 49ers have missed that. You know, they addressed some things in free agency, but you know, those are 1 and 2-year deals with both the end and the D tackles. So I think you can't take end or tackle off the board for the 49ers on defense in the early rounds either. And so a lot of undersized, like 3 techniques. Like they're wide receivers and defensive tackles are getting so small coming out of college. It's pretty wild. And you have to draft what the college ranks give you. And so I don't know. One of these undersized penetrating defensive tackles, I could absolutely see one of those picks as well early.
You know, I mean, Andrew just wants the 49ers to trade the farm for Fisk from Florida State. Anyway, I mean, like, I think that's just the move.
Round 2, is that the right spot? 63 for Fisk. I mean, I don't know if he sneaks into the first round. I don't know if he gets to 63, but yeah, absolutely.
I was hoping 63 for Fisk, and then the combine happened, and I legit texted Kyle Posey, and I was like, so like 31 for Fisk now, because like we're both Florida State guys, so we're obviously in on Fisk and Verse, and
he was
those
phenomenal. He was the buzz. He was the talk of the town.
Oh, I could feel the buzz from Indianapolis and Sacramento. Like that's how good Fisk was at the combine. So he was one of the guys I liked. I also obviously like Verse a little bit.
I saw Verse at 31 to the 49ers in a mock draft. I don't think he gets there. He's going to be one of the 2. Probably Dallas Turner is the first. I think Dallas Turner is going to be the first defensive player off the board.
Yeah, I think so too.
Verse is probably going to be next on the D line.
Okay, help me out a little bit because this is a question I have, and this isn't necessarily Niner related, but it is edge rusher. Latu, he's so interesting to me because I feel like a lot of people are talking about him as like not like a surefire thing, but they're talking very highly of him. But he's never mocked in the top 10. He's always in that Seattle, Los Angeles, Cincinnati area. Why is that with Latu? I know it's not Niner related, but I'm very curious with him because I see a lot of good things with him.
He'd be a phenomenal pick for the 49ers if he gets there. And he's ready to play instantly. He's got a lot of technique. He's kind of poor man's Nick Bosa as far as that goes. Like a guy who's that ready with that much, technique and that good with his hands already entering the league. And his combine was good as well. So if the medicals check out, I think he's going to go pretty high. But you're right. He goes, and that's where the groupthink comes in, right? Because how's it possible that all 32 teams see Latu in this exact range between like the 5 picks that he always goes in the middle of the, mid to early 20s. He never goes in the top 10. He sometimes starts going like around the Rams and pick 16 to 22 or something like that. And he goes in that range in every mock draft. Never gets to 31 with the 49ers, never goes in the top 10. No. It's just wild how we've really dialed in where we think these guys are going to go. And that's what makes the draft so fun when all of a sudden at pick 8, there's a guy that people had in the 20s goes, and then at 31, the 49ers are sitting there with a guy who everyone had going in the top 15 the whole mock draft season.
I love it. I that's what I like about the drafts, because I've been trying to go through more mock drafts this year, and it's just been really fun to see the variance. But I just feel like the most consistent thing with Latu is potentially being one of the best in the draft class, but he's just always at 20. And then that's what it's so funny to me. But that's what I like about the draft is like Amarius Mims. You guys talked about him. I could see a case for him going top 15, but he could also fall to the 9. And that's what I like about mock drafts, is where people get mad at them. It's like, well, have you seen what the actual draft produces? And that's right. I think why people like it.
And for me, doing mock drafts, the fun of it is, so you start with doing a mock draft with no trades, and you're like, well, I don't like how this board falls for my team at all. So you got to go somewhere and move. Okay, well, where do we move? Do we need to go up here? Should we try to go down here? And so that's why the scenarios play out. The mock draft for me isn't trying to guess it, because it's chaos and you're never going to guess it right. The fun for me is to try to figure out, okay, if this happens, what changes here, and what could this team possibly do? What could they be looking at? Could the 49ers go up? What happens if you trade Brandon Ayuk? How does that change how you build your football team? Maybe you get a different level of offensive lineman, and then it allows you to play around at wide receiver and get one of these high upside guys as well. And so that's what's fun about mock draft scenarios.
Brian, we've got you for a few more minutes. Again, thank you so much for taking some time out for a little old us. Let's pivot away from the draft talk, and let's talk about something that's kind of been debated hotly on 49ers Twitter. Justin Blackman visits with the 49ers, and now the discussion turns from, well, why are they bringing in a safety? Why has Justin Simmons been linked there? What do they do with Talanoa Hufanga, who was a former All-Pro. And what does this say? I think the visit is more than anything.
I think the visit for Julian Blackmon makes sense. They need a rangy safety.
Did I say Justin Blackmon? I'm sorry. Julian
Justin
Blackmon. I'm sorry.
is very different football player.
I love wide receivers. That's why I'm just locked in on that.
Hopefully they don't bring
Hopefully they don't bring in Justin Blackmon.
Someone who is, got a cocaine problem or whatever it was Justin Blackmon had. I love the fit with Julian Blackmon. I don't think he's going to cost a lot of money. We're in the second wave of free agency now. Safeties aren't getting paid. Safeties are like the new running back. Just teams don't pay them. The 49ers are really good at identifying and finding safeties, and the 49ers are so good up front on the defensive line. I think that's helped their defensive backs play up in the past as well. But Michael Silver's been nailing everything this offseason. And when
nobody's been cooking
like about the 49ers potentially replacing Hufanga, that was a double take for me, because if anybody else wrote it, I'd been like, what are you talking about? That's insanity. But I got to give some credence to it. And they did trade up to draft Jair Brown last year. And Jair Brown's, his scouting report was nearly identical to what
the
Hufanga
same thing
was.
as Hufanga. The same thing. The same
player.
guy.
And so if you're looking at them as your strong safeties and you're trying to bring in a free safety, well, that means only one of those two guys is going to start. So are they down on Brown or are they down on Talanoa Hufanga? That's the only logical conclusion I could come to if they're signing a starting free safety. So that's really fascinating to me. And I don't know if it's Hufanga or Brown, but if you are trying to replace Hufanga, trade him to Adam Peters in Washington or something, right? There's got to be a market for him, because I can't imagine they just completely bench Talanoa Hufanga.
I don't think that'll happen either.
Yeah, and especially too with like the quickness of reportedly or rumored of maybe moving off of him, because it seems they really wanted him to be the guy to kind of step in for Tart and Ward and kind of change the idea of what they want safeties to do. And now it just seems a very quick hook. I know the ACL complicates things, but it feels like a very quick hook to move on from Hufanga. So that came out of nowhere for me.
Maybe it's injury related, because the Greenlaw thing is similar this offseason, where they're so interested in linebackers and bringing in like veteran guys who can play right now. Maybe the medical reports aren't great for both those guys, and they just don't know if they'll be back this season, and they're trying to protect themselves there. That makes a lot more sense. But if you're talking about straighten up benching a guy, then I don't know if that really adds up.
And it's the injury and then the impending having to pay him. Like when you have a guy who's won an All-Pro, we're not talking about a guy who had, some success or is just somebody who has an impact without, like, when you're an All-Pro, that kind of just sticks with you, and that goes with you to negotiation table. So I think the injury and the way that his contract is going to come up, and they have to pay all these other guys, it all just makes for a perfect storm of speculation. And I think that's what this all is. But when you see a safety coming in, I would lean more to just making sure that they're insulated once again, because you don't know if Gibson's coming back. To me, that signifies that I think Gibson definitely isn't coming back and maybe just is retiring as well, because that was a nice safety net for them as well, too. But yeah, I really think that they're just trying to make sure that they're in a spot where they're not stuck looking to plug holes.
No doubt. And yeah, when you look at where the 49ers are with this roster, they have to start making really hard decisions on who they're going to pay, because they have a lot of good players, and you can't just pay everybody top of the market money at every position. And they're paying some non-premium positions a lot of money. They have the highest paid running back in the league. They have one of the highest paid linebackers, tight ends. Those are traditionally positions that don't make as much money. And so now you got to pay a defensive end. Now you got to pay a wide receiver. Oh, shoot. Now we got to pay another wide receiver. And then we're going to have to pay a quarterback, Brock Purdy, $50 million next offseason probably, right? Because he's going to be due. And so you have to start making some tough decisions, and you have to make sure you're paying the guys that you think are difference makers. And that might make for some hard decisions. And that might be why they'd be willing to let Hufanga go, because they know they're just not going to pay any top of the market safety with where their roster is right now. And that's the tough decision with Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, because you're not going to pay them both at the same time. So the question is, do you trade Ayuk now or Deebo later?
Yeah.
Brian, are you insinuating
real quick, Andrew? Shout out to the Cleveland Browns for completely screwing up this wide receiver market and another market. Thank you for paying Jerry Jeudy for literally almost nothing. And now Brandon Ayuk looks at that and says, "I've done more in one season than he's done probably his entire career so far. I deserve that amount of money as well." Thanks a lot, Cleveland Browns. You really know how to negotiate.
I was going to say, Brian, are you trying to insinuate that keeping a Super Bowl team together is very difficult in today's salary cap age?
I mean, it's tough. And I mean, we've seen it with the Kansas City Chiefs. You got to choose who to pay. And if you have a superstar quarterback, it makes it a lot easier.
Weird.
And do the 49ers have that going forward with a quarterback head coach combination that's going to allow them to do some other things and make hard decisions? And I think that's the path forward. But again, we're here on March. What day is it? March 22nd?
22nd.
We're not trying to push Ayuk out the door, folks. I think they're going to re-sign him, let him play together one more year. First year money's going to be low enough to where the dollars don't hit with Debo and Ayuk at the same time on the cap. Then you trade Debo next offseason. You draft a wide receiver this year to try to help you get ready for replacing Debo in the future. And you have one more run in it on offense. Add an offensive lineman in there in the draft. Add a defensive lineman in there, corner maybe. That's got to be the plan. That's what it looks like to me. But which order they draft them in is my big question right now. And I think the first 30 picks in the draft are going to tell us that.
Yep. Well, Brian, we're up against time here. We really appreciate you joining us. It's meant a lot. It's been fun to talk, a lot of good draft talk. Just real quick before we get out of here, anything you want to plug, anything you want to get out there for the people before we get out of here for today?
Oh, yeah, just let you guys know I'm doing the daily podcast thing. I have 2 different daily NFL shows, Locked On 49ers and the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Myself and former NFL scout, former ESPN scribe, Matt Williamson. We cover the entire league daily. Both shows on the Locked On Podcast Network. And there's going to be an ultimate mock draft upcoming. I know who the picks are now because we just did our live behind the scenes draft, but it's going to be a multi-series draft where all the hosts pick for their teams. We have analysts, and it's a really fun project. Look for that coming up in the coming weeks on the Locked On Podcast Network. The 2024 ultimate mock draft's a lot of fun, and you can find me on Twitter at BD Peacock.
And just to let you know, just as good as Brian is as a podcaster, he's extremely tall also, by the way. That was the biggest development of the first time that I met Brian at training camp. I just couldn't believe how tall the guy is.
By the way, during the combine, I measured myself because I didn't really know. And I tell people I'm 6'4", and I was like, I don't know, I might be 6'3.5". I might be 6'5". I have no idea. I just tell people 6'4". And most people lie about their height. So people are like, you must be 6'5". Because I'm 6 foot, and they're like, well, you're 5'9.5", so maybe I'm 2. You know what I mean? It's one of those things. So I measure myself 6'041". That's 6'4 1/8". That's my official height. So Aponte, you can't count the hair either. I want to know what your official combine height is.
Did you saying you took the measurement and then using the 6'04"? Did you use the official measurement like in the NFL at the combine?
No.
Did you sneak in?
No, I just I had my wife stand on a chair and draw a line on the top of my head, and I measured where the line was from the
pretty official. That's the official. That's actually the you know how they have the unofficial 40 time and then the official. That's how they do it. The official. They just do the line over the head.
What I love is the hair doesn't count. The hair doesn't
a whole bunch of lines on it.
I love that the hair doesn't count because I was literally having this discussion, I think at a bar like the other day, and I was like, yeah, I'm 6'5". They're like, with the hair, and I'm like, I don't know, am I? I was like, does that count too?
You got to be barefoot. You got to put your heels on the ground, and you have to have your heels against the wall, back flat against the wall, and then you take the ruler and you smash down the hair all the way to the top of the head, and that's where the line is.
All right.
Might have my next Twitter post in my head here.
No, we'll get it done. We'll get it done. We will definitely get it done because I need to know now for 100%.
None of this NBA in shoes stuff where guys who are 6'6" are listed at 6'9".
Brian, we really appreciate it, man. Thank you very much. Go enjoy all the podcasts, Locked On 49er, all that. Thank you very much. And Jason Aponte, we're going to get out of here as well. Jason, thank you for joining as well, I guess. I don't know. Jason Aponte, as always. Smooth exit.
I'm gonna get back to MLB The Show and beat Derek Jeter some more. It's really good.
That's what I'm doing.
Thanks for the invite.
Welcome, everybody.
We are live.
My name is Jason Aponte.
I am Andrew Pasquini.
We're working. That's it. We're working over here. That's it. Let's go Niners.
Let's go Niners.